about it, they supported Nestorius, although John of Antioch agreed to accept the expression Theotokos in 433 AD, 2 years after the rival councils of Ephesus issued anathemas and counter-anathemas. The birth of Prophet Muhammad in the year 570 AD had serious repercussions for the Church of the East. Since Khadijah is the rich lady and the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad was a member of this church, it had constant contact with Islam from its inception. Khadijah consulted her cousin Warqa when Muhammad had vision of Allah in his sleep. Warqa said that the Ruh Qudusha, Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, inspired it. The Prophet tolerated Christians. Yeah, we did a video on Muhammad, and he was a nice guy to that Assyrian church. He let them do their thing, but the caliphate after him, or his first caliphate, was very cruel to them and started persecuting them, etc., etc. Patriarch Timotheus, one of the 8th century, had close contact with Caliph al-Mahdi. The dialogue between the Patriarch and the Caliph al-Mahdi is available in Syriac and Arabic. Alfonso Mangana has brought out of English translations of this dialogue. And there's a footnote. A Malayalam translation was published by Manuscripts Press, Csiro, 1957. We may actually have a copy of that, but it's all in Indian, and only English it has is talking about St. Thomas going to India. In 635 AD, Ephrem took Christianity to China. In 736, Mili took the gospel to Japan and spread into many Arabian regions. Tibet and far eastern countries like Indonesia and Ceylon, now known as Sri Lanka. In the 11th century, it outnumbered the members of all the Western churches put together. Because of the decline of the church in recent years, it is not in a position to unearth historical details of her glorious past. Nevertheless, Western scholars, whether Roman Catholic or Protestant, are doing research and writing doctoral dissertations, digging deeper into the glorious past of this church, the Assyrian Church of the East. Some more information there about Ephrem bringing Christianity to China, 635 AD. The Middle Ages. In the 13th century, when the Abbasid Empire fell, Christians thought that they would have better prospects under the Mongols. Guyuk died 1248. The grandson of Chinggis Khan had a Christian vizier, and he himself is described by Ibn al-Ibri as a true Christian. In his days, the bishops and priests had access to the places of power in the land. In 1258, Hulagu conquered Baghdad. His wife was a true Christian queen. Some more information here. Rabban Salma died 1317. And monk Marcos, maybe that's died or dated, not really sure, 1318, went on an embassy to Rome and France as the ambassadors of Kublai Khan at the end of the 13th century. A Syriac book was translated into English and published by James Montgomery in New York in 1927 under the title The History of Jabalaha II or III, the historian Patriarch, and of his vicar Barsaum, dated 1317, or did he die 1317? Some of the remarks are interesting and useful for the ecumenical negotiations going on today. And there's a reference underneath. Here's some more information here. Patriarch dies and is replaced or succeeded by. Some more information. Around 1400 AD, terrific persecutions fell on this church. Tamerlane was a fanatic. His ambition was to conquer the whole world. After Tamerlane, the Assyrian church had never had peaceful days. Christianity disappeared from the Arabian Peninsula. The glorious days are over. The the Assyrians had to settle down in the mountains of Akari in Turkey. Some Assyrians settled down in the Azerbaijan area. The Ottoman Empire established itself in the plain of Mosul in 1516-17, and by a treaty of 1555 with the Safavid state of Persia, acquired Kurdistan. The same treaty annexed Azerbaijan by Persia. A large number of Syrian Christians settled around Urmia. In 1562 there was at least 4 metropolitan sees in Urmia area. In the Council of Florence, 1438 to 1445, during the pontificate of Pope Eugene IV, all the Nestorians of Cyprus joined the Catholic Church. Bishop Timotheus of the Diocese of Cyprus of the Church of the East signed a document of unity with Rome in August 1445 AD. These Christians were Mesopotamian immigrants. In his profession of faith, the Metropolitan describes himself as Archbishop of Tarsus for the Chaldeans and Bishop of those of them who were in Cyprus, quoted from the paper presented by Friar Sahad Jama in the Joint Committee for Theological Dialogue held at Arezzo, Italy on 13th October 2000. They later adopted the Latin Rite. Is that like Latin rituals or something? And then they split under John Sulaka 1553. When Patriarch Shimon Bar Mama died in 1551, his nephew Shimon VII Dinha was consecrated the Patriarch of the Church of the East, and so forth. He was consecrated in Rome under the name Patriarch Mar John Sulaka. The Franciscan missionaries who were already among the Assyrians helped Rabban Sulaka. He presented to Pope Julius III a profession of faith. In April 20, 1553, was solemnly invested as Patriarch in the Cathedral Church of St. John the Lateran. He was given the pallium with the right, in case of theft or loss, to have one made for him. His successors were exempted from going over to Rome for a consecration. Since he was the first one to be consecrated a Patriarch in Rome from the Church of the East, he was given the title of the Patriarch of the Chaldeans. The majority of the Church of the East continued to support Patriarch Mar Shimon Dinha of the hereditary line. Here's some more information. About the Chaldean bishops, etc. The history of the Chaldean branch is left here, or maybe left out here, because this dissertation is about the Assyrian Church of the East. It should be noted here that there were many conflicts between the Chaldeans and the Assyrians. Both patriarchs tried to send bishops to India. The Chaldean patriarch was prohibited, wasn't allowed, was stopped from sending bishops to India because Rome thought that they should directly deal with the church in Malabar. The last Chaldean bishop of this period, Mar Abraham, died in January 1597, which made it easy for the patriarchs. Made it easy for the Archbishop of Goa to conduct a synod in June 1599 at Udayampura near Cochin. It has been a continuous controversy in the history of the church in India as to how much Chaldean the Indian church should be, especially because the Indian church known as Csiro Malabar is much bigger, at least 5 times more, than the Chaldean church spread all over the world. The Csiro Malabar church has accepted the liturgy of Addai and Mari, but they are not permitted to have a patriarch, but only a major archbishop. The Syrian Church of the East continued under the hereditary patriarchs of Mar Shimon family, and so forth. Maybe this is talking about Patriarch Joseph IV Aldo. It has here the same writer remarks that many of the Nestorian parishes joined the Catholic faith during the administration of Patriarch Aldo. In 1853 he codified the Chaldean canon law in the Latin form at the Council of Raban Hormizd. This was done under the influence of the Apostolic delegate Plankett, who was a Jesuit. The Patriarch was always opposed to the Congregation of the Propagation of Faith. By 1860 AD it was open defiance. In 1861, against the advice of Rome, Patriarch sent Mar Thoma Rokos, Metropolitan, to India. This Chaldean bishop was well received in Csiro, but in 1862 he was forced to return to Mesopotamia. Rome used its influence in India to push Rokos out of Kerala. However, Friar Anthony Fondant returned with him by the same steamship and requested Patriarch Joseph Aldo to consecrate him a metropolitan. The Latin advisors did not allow Patriarch to do it, so he went to the Assyrian Patriarch in Kochanis Mar Ruvel Shamun and was consecrated metropolitan in 1862. Patriarch Aldo sent Metropolitan Yohanan Elia Malus to India in 1874, and he lived in Csiro up to 1882. On 25th January 1870, Patriarch Aldo made a strong speech in the First Vatican Council, 1869-70, making his claims known about the rights and privileges of the Eastern Church. In 1876 he was threatened with excommunication. On March 1st, 1877, the Patriarch wrote to Pope Pius IX, expressing his full submission to the Pope. Pope replied him in a friendly letter. Because of the fact that Yohanan Hormizd, the Chaldean Patriarch appointed in 1830, was the cousin of the Assyrian Patriarch Mar Elia Shamun XIII, who died in 1804, the Catholic scholars today argue that the original line of Patriarchate is now the Catholic Chaldean line, and the Patriarchs of the Assyrian Church today are the successors of Sulaka. It is very difficult for the members of the Church of the East to accept this argument. Ever since the present writer, or this author, read about this view in the book of Cardinal Tisserant more than 4 decades ago, he is not fully convinced by this argument continuously presented by the Catholic scholars. Dr. Csiro, who is a layman, has presented in his paper the Chaldean view very effectively, but most Assyrians do not accept this view. At the conclusion of his paper he presented a chart with the names of all Nestorian and Chaldean bishops. According to that list, the following persons who preceded Patriarch Mar Elia Shamun Ishoyab, who died in 1804 AD, are put under the caption Returning Nestorians. This line continues to the present day. He omits the names of the successors in the Nestorian line. Looks like the Shamuns had quite a lot of influence and involvement in this church. The list of the patriarchs of the Church of the East is also a matter of confusion to some scholars, and so forth. The Assyrians are proud of their tradition. Synod of Diempa, 1599 AD. The history of the origins of the Church in India is not discussed in detail here. Some scholars question the historicity of the apostolic origin of the Church in India, stating that there are no historical documents to prove the mission of St. Thomas in India. Those doubting Thomists admit that the church in India came around 500 AD, as they cannot deny the historical evidence of the reference in the Christian topography of Cosmas in the Coplustus, in which Cosmas states that he witnessed a Christian community in the southwest coast of India with bishops coming from Persia. Nevertheless, many Indian scholars believe that the tradition of St. Thomas established 7 churches in South India in 52 AD is correct. Friar Matthias A. Mundadan CMI, one of the most respected church historians today, asserts, from the discussion of sources above, it is obvious that in order to assess the origins of Christianity in India, there is no alternative but to take tradition into account. This is generally true also with regard to their history till the end of the 15th century. A few records do exist, both in the west and in the east, which refer to the existence of Christians in India in the ancient and medieval times, but they are few and far between. Check out the Jovovich guy, what's the name they use? Can't remember the name they use. Yeah, he has a documentary on his quest to find the lost tribes of Israel, 10 lost tribes of Israel, and he actually found them. He was Jew from Israel, was taken along behind him, and each one that they met, they did the matzvah, bread, etc., all these old traditions, and this Jew said, how the heck can they know all that? We never taught them anything, or they never showed them anything, and yet they knew all of this. And these people said, well, we've known it for centuries, it's been our tradition and our culture, etc. And some of these were the first ones that you see walking into Israel. They are the Ethiopians, said to be the original Jews, and then they found some Indians who knew the old House of Israel customs, traditions, etc., the matzvah bread. And then they came across some Asians, these Chinese, who were practicing the same, doing the same rituals, traditions, etc. And the only problem with them, according to Jovovich, was that they were armed to the teeth, militants, and if they went to Israel, they may set off the apocalypse or Armageddon, because of their trigger happy. So yeah, the majority were dark skinned, or black, to olive skin, Indian, brown, etc., and Asian. So these tribes were obviously being Semitic, or Semites, Semites were a mixture of all different peoples, different races that must have come together, be desert roamers and all that sort of stuff, or nomads, and became this one group of tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel. Abraham, the last bishop of the 16th century, died in 1597. He had been under the pressure of Rome to correct the prayers, etc., which were in use in Kerala. Abraham was asked to make the necessary correction to the Syriac prayer books. As there were no other bishops in Kerala at that time, Alexio Dominius made the decree of the emperor with the secret purpose of destroying the existing Persian tradition, which was prevalent in India at that time. Since Alexio Dominius did not know the Syriac language, he asked Francis Ross, a Catalan Jesuit who had studied Syriac language, to write the Arobius Nestorianorum, the Nestorian eras Some Catholic scholars argue that it was only a pretext to submit them to the royal patronage of Portugal. Archbishop Menezes had written to the Roman Catholic Church, titular Archbishop of Jerusalem, that he wanted to purge the Church in India of heresy and errors. The major ones were the infancy of our Saviour, History of Our Lady, the Book of John Baraldon, Procession of the Holy Spirit, and so forth. Some more here. The hidden agenda of converting the native Christians into another brand of Christians was a new phenomenon. This was a time when Martin Luther had not nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the castle church at Wittenberg, Germany, where his tomb is situated. But after 1517 AD, the Reformation under Martin Luther took away many thousands of Christians from under the authority of the Pope. The revolt, led by King Henry VIII, also separated the Christians in England from obedience to the Pope. Then the Roman Catholic Church tried to get Christians outside their sphere into its fold and turned to the east. We have already seen that in 1553 AD, Pope Julius III had consecrated John Salaka, a monk from Mesopotamia, the Patriarch of Babylon. This consecration took place in the Cathedral Church of St. John the Lateran in Rome. In India, the Portuguese tried to stop the bishops coming from the Church of the East. After the split of John Salaka, the bishops from his side began to come to India. Although John Salaka himself wanted to send bishops to India, he was murdered in the beginning of 1555 AD. But his successor, Patriarch Ignatios, sent Joseph, brother of the murdered Salaka, to India to be installed as metropolitan in Malabar. But unfortunately, he had to face opposition from the authorities in Goa. They were technically Roman Catholics, as the Pope consecrated their Patriarch. The Portuguese, nevertheless, were not satisfied by such explanations. The Portuguese wanted to send Western bishops to these Eastern Christians. Before the end of the 16th century, another difference also took place. In 1582, Pope Gregory introduced a new calendar, now known as the Gregorian Calendar. The Syrian Christians were following the Eastern calendar, known as the Julian Calendar. At present, there is a difference of 13 days between these two calendars, but in the 16th century it was a difference of 10 days. On 4th October, the Pope commanded that the next day would be counted October 15th and not October 5, as most of the Eastern churches are still doing. But a difference of 1 day in each century, except the one every 4 centuries, makes it a difference of 13 days. The Christians in India did not adopt this calendar. In 1599, when Archbishop Alexios Dominius conducted the Synod of the Emperor, or Udayamperira, on 20th of June, he called it the third Sunday after Pentecost. These differences were there, but the Portuguese wanted the Indian Christians to completely identify themselves with the customs and administrations of the Portuguese style. The decree of the Synod of the Emperor proved this. This resulted in a conflict and confusion, which we see later in 1653 AD, culminated in the revolt in the form of the oath at the Cunning Cross in Matanchiri, Cochin. A day before the Synod of the Emperor was to be convened, the spies of Archbishop Menezes reported that the Syrian Christians were concerned about the changes which the Synod was trying to bring about. The people said with much feeling, "Tomorrow we shall have done forever with our Patriarch of Babylon, who governed us all these years. We shall no more name at divine office or mass Simon, which such was the name of the Patriarch who then governed them," and so forth. There's some more information here on that. Synod, etc. Some other canons of this session were to warn the Christians against contact with the Hindus, remarks Friar Joseph Theketath in his book on the history of Christianity in India, Volume 2. He further observes, thus the doctrines of transmigration, fate and indifferentism were condemned. Christian children were forbidden to attend the schools for reading and fencing, conducted by Hindu teachers, if the latter obliged all their pupils to worship their idols. Christian teachers were ordered to remove from their schools any idols which may have been set up there to enable their Hindu pupils to worship them. The 20th, 21st degrees stated that the Malabar Church accepted the Council of Ephesus of 431 AD and the Council of Trent of the 16th century decree, which states, Synod acknowledged the glorious Cyril, Archbishop and Patriarch of Alexandria, who by the order of the Bishop of Rome presided in the Holy Ephesian Council, to be a blessed saint at this time enjoying God in heaven, and that is doctrine in the said council against the Nestorians is holy and universally received in the Catholic Church, professing all that reject it to be excommunicated heretics, and so forth. Some more information. The Church of Malabar revolted on 3rd January 1653 AD. They took an oath at Coonan Cross and Cochin, swearing that they and their children would never submit to the Paulists, the foreign Roman Catholic Jesuit priests who cut away their historic obedience to the Patriarch of the Persian Church. As there was no bishop to consecrate bishops among them, 12 priests laid hands on the Archdeacon Thomas on 20 May 1653. And made him their bishop, later known in history as Metropolitan Martoma I. This archdeacon was a celibate. He belonged to the famous Pakalamatom family. According to the Church of the East, the archdeacons can marry. Only the clergy in episcopal ranks had obligated to keep celibacy. There is no evidence to conclude that all archdeacons were celibates. The Csiro Malabar scholars argue that it was not a revolt against the Pope, as the non-Catholic scholars claim. It was a revolt only against one religious order of the Roman Catholics, i.e. the Jesuits. The Church of the East was reduced to a small group. The majority of that community, ruled by the bishops sent by the Patriarch of the Church of the East, came under the Catholic Church as a result of the colonial missionary activities of Portuguese and dedicated service of the Jesuits, as well as other monastic congregations. This church is now known as the Csiro Malabar Church, numbering more than 3.3 million members, under the major Archbishop of Ernakulam and Ankamali Mavake Vitha Yathefo, and so forth. So they were tied to the Roman Catholic Church for quite a while there. A lot more information on Isa Barsaum. Trying to see when the Apostolic Church of the East actually split from the Roman Catholic Church. Abraham Shimon, Patriarch, dated 1860. Shimon's suspicion was clear from the following words. The Pope, he said, had sent people from Rome who has seduced part of our church. His doctrine is new, but ours is old. We never change our forms of worship, but we keep to and abide by what was delivered to us by the apostles and our fathers. Therefore you must know that we never change our doctrine nor our forms of worship. The American missionary Asahel Grant expresses his views that the Assyrians will not accept Romish faith. He observes, the Nestorians have nobly stood their ground and they are still upon the watchtower. As I approached the mountain fastnesses, their first inquiry was to know whether I was a Catholic, declaring that they would not permit these wolves in sheep's clothing to enter their country. Hitherto they have prevented the emissaries of Rome from entering their mountains, but the latter are looking with eagerness to this interesting field, and while they are extending their labours in the east, no effort will be spared to spread their influence among the mountain tribes. Will Protestant churches, to whom the Nestorians are stretching out their hands for help, suffer the golden harvest to fall into the garner of the Pope?